Before we begin, write in the comments which city and country you're watching from. This channel exists to record stories that should never have been forgotten. In the winter of 1856, a physician in Charleston, South Carolina, wrote a private letter that was never meant to be published. In it, he described examining an enslaved woman who could recite medical texts she had never read, predict weather patterns with impossible accuracy, and solve mathematical equations that confounded educated men. He wrote, "I have examined her thoroughly. There is no deception. There is no trick." And that is precisely what terrifies me. This letter, discovered in a sealed archive 160 years later, is one of dozens of documents that tell the story of a woman whose very existence challenged everything the antebellum South believed about race, intelligence, and power. Her name appears in plantation ledgers, court records, medical journals, and church registries. And in every document, someone tried to explain her away. They called her dangerous. They called her possessed. They called her a liar. They never called her what she was, a genius they could not silence, no matter how many times they tried to bury her. The first record appears in a slave inventory dated January 1841. Among the list of property belonging to the Whitmore plantation in rural South Carolina, between entries for field hands and house servants, appears a single notation: female child, age approximately 6 years, arrived from Virginia estate sale. No known family. Noted for unusual silence. Name recorded as Mercy. The notation is brief, clerical, unremarkable, but in the margin, written in different ink, added later, are 4 words that someone tried to scratch out. Should have been drowned. Mercy's early years on the Whitmore plantation followed the brutal pattern of enslaved childhood in the 1840s American South. She worked in the kitchen from dawn until late evening. She slept on the floor of the cookhouse. She spoke rarely. Plantation records show nothing extraordinary about her for 5 years. And then, in the summer of 1846, something impossible happened. The plantation overseer, a man named Cyrus Brennan, kept detailed daily logs. Most entries concerned crop yields, weather conditions, and disciplinary actions. But on August 14, 1846, his handwriting becomes agitated, the letters slanting sharply. The girl Mercy, age 11, recited today the entirety of Mr. Whitmore's medical volume, a text on human anatomy she has never been permitted to see, much less read. When questioned, she stated each organ's Latin name, its function, and the symptoms of its disease. Mr. Whitmore was present. He went pale and left the room. I do not know what this means, but I fear it. The medical volume in question was a 400-page textbook that Nathaniel Whitmore had brought from his brief time studying medicine in Philadelphia before inheriting the plantation. It was kept in his private study, locked behind glass. Mercy had never entered that room. When Nathaniel Whitmore demanded to know how she had accessed his book, Mercy is recorded as saying only, "I heard you reading it, upstairs, at night." Every word stayed. Whitmore had indeed read passages from the book aloud to his wife, who suffered from chronic illness. He read to her in the evening in their second-floor bedroom. The cookhouse where Mercy slept was 40 yards away. The acoustic impossibility of this, hearing and perfectly retaining complex medical text from that distance, is noted in Whitmore's own diary, which survives in fragmentary form. It cannot be natural. No child, no person of any race could possess such memory. And yet I tested her for 2 hours on passages I had read weeks ago, and she did not fail once. Orchestrated narrative structure with historical context and dramatic reveals. Bom início. Agora preciso continuar desenvolvendo ciclos de revelação e consequência. Vou introduzir o CTA e depois continuar com a contextualização histórica e os eventos subsequentes. He added, in smaller script at the bottom of the page, "My wife insists we sell her immediately." I am inclined to agree. But before we continue with what happened next, I want you to write in the comments. What would you do if you discovered someone with abilities that science couldn't explain? Would you try to understand, or would you try to hide them? To understand what happened to Mercy, you must understand the world that surrounded her. The year 1846 in South Carolina existed within a society that had built its entire economy, legal structure, and moral philosophy on a single premise: that enslaved people were intellectually inferior, incapable of higher reasoning, and therefore suited only for labor. This wasn't casual prejudice, it was codified doctrine. Medical journals of the era published papers claiming to prove biological differences in brain structure. Religious leaders preached that enslavement was ordained by divine will. The South Carolina Legal Code of 1740, still in effect in 1846, made it illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write, punishable by fines or whipping for both the enslaved person and anyone who taught them. The entire social order depended on this belief. Plantation owners, merchants, politicians, clergy, their wealth, status, and self-image rested on the assumption that the people they enslaved were fundamentally lesser beings. And then Mercy demonstrated again and again that she was intellectually superior to most of the educated white men who claimed ownership over her existence. The historical record shows that Nathaniel Whitmore did not sell Mercy in 1846. Instead, he did something far stranger. He began testing her. A private journal kept by Whitmore's wife, Eleanor, describes the next 6 months. The entries are fragmented, pages have been torn out, but what remains is telling. September 3rd, Nathaniel has become obsessed with the girl. He brought her to his study tonight and read to her in Greek. Within the hour, she could recite and translate passages of Homer. He says it proves nothing, but I see the fear in his eyes. October 19th. He gave her a mathematical problem that took him 3 days to solve with his college notes. She solved it in her head in 20 minutes. He has stopped sleeping. November 30th. Reverend Patterson visited today. Nathaniel asked him to examine the girl for signs of possession. The Reverend questioned her for 2 hours on biblical scripture. She corrected his Latin twice. He left early and told us to destroy her before she destroys us. On December 12, 1846, Eleanor Whitmore's journal contains only one sentence. He locked her in the cellar. God forgive us all. But the cellar period did not last. What happened next is documented in a letter from Nathaniel Whitmore to his brother, a physician in Charleston. Thomas, I write to you in desperation. The girl I mentioned in my previous correspondence has fallen gravely ill. I have kept her confined for 3 weeks, hoping isolation would. I do not know what I hoped. But yesterday she collapsed, and now she burns with fever and speaks in delirium. I cannot call a local doctor. You understand why. Can you come? I fear she will die, and I fear more what will be said if she does. Dr. Thomas Whitmore arrived at the plantation on December 20th, 1846. His medical notes from that visit survive in the Charleston Medical Archive, filed under Unusual Cases, Colored Population. Patient, female, enslaved, age approximately 12 years. Presenting symptoms: high fever, 104°, rapid pulse, periods of unconsciousness alternating with lucid speech. During lucid periods, patient accurately described her own symptoms using medical terminology and predicted the fever would break on the evening of the 3rd day. When asked how she knew this, she stated she could feel the pattern inside. Fever broke precisely as predicted. Recovery was complete within 1 week. I have no medical explanation for her predictive accuracy. Dr. Whitmore added, in a note appended later, "My brother asked if this could be witchcraft. I told him I do not believe in witchcraft, but I do not disbelieve it as firmly as I did before." When Mercy recovered, the Whitmore household faced a problem. Word had spread among neighboring plantations that they possessed an enslaved girl with unnatural abilities. Some owners were curious, others were disturbed. All recognized the danger such a person represented. because here was the crucial terror. If one enslaved person could demonstrate intelligence equal or superior to their masters, what did that say about all enslaved people? What did that say about the entire system? The South Carolina planter class of 1847 understood with perfect clarity that Mercy was not just one exceptional individual. She was proof that everything they believed, everything they had built, was a lie. And so they did what power always does when confronted with an undeniable truth it cannot accept. They tried to destroy the evidence. The first attempt came in the spring of 1847. A plantation owner named Malcolm Hendricks offered to buy Mercy for twice her assessed value. Nathaniel Whitmore, financially struggling, accepted. The bill of sale, dated March 15, 1847, describes her only as one Negro girl, aged 12, skilled in house service. Hendricks owned a cotton plantation 40 miles inland. He was known for brutal efficiency and for his position on the Charleston Board of Commissioners, where he had advocated for stricter laws governing enslaved populations. What Hendricks planned to do with Mercy was never officially recorded. But a letter from his wife to her sister, discovered in an estate sale in 1923, provides context. Malcolm purchased a girl that people speak of in whispers. He says she is a test case. If she is as intelligent as claimed, he will present her to the medical society as proof that such exceptions exist but remain exactly that, exceptions that prove the rule. If she is merely clever, or if the stories are exaggerated, he will punish those who spread false tales. Either way, he says, the matter will be settled. Mercy arrived at the Hendricks plantation on March 22, 1847. On April 3, 1847, Malcolm Hendricks was found dead. The coroner's report attributes death to heart failure. He was 43 years old with no previous heart condition. The report notes that he was discovered in his study at dawn, slumped over his desk. His face, according to the examining physician, showed an expression of profound shock. On the desk in front of him was a letter he had been writing to the South Carolina Medical Society. The letter remains in the Charleston Historical Archive. It reads, "Gentlemen, I must retract my previous assertions regarding the intellectual limitations of the Negro race. I have conducted extensive examination of a subject in my possession, and I must report findings that disturb every assumption I have held. This individual has demonstrated knowledge of classical literature, advanced mathematics, human physiology, and agricultural chemistry that I, with my education, cannot match. More troubling, she appears to know things she has no earthly means of knowing. Yesterday, I mentioned, only in my mind I did not speak aloud, that I was considering writing this letter. She said to me, 'You should not write that letter, Mr. Hendricks. They will not believe you, and it will not end well. Gentlemen, I do not believe in thought reading, but the letter ends there. Unfinished, the ink still wet when he died.' Malcolm Hendricks' widow sold Mercy the next day to a trader for a quarter of what her husband had paid. She told the trader, 'Take her far from here and never speak of where she came from.' Between 1847 and 1851, Mercy changed hands 7 times. Each ownership lasted between 3 months and 1 year. Each ended in death, financial ruin, or sudden, desperate sale. The documentation is fragmentary but consistent. Samuel Morrison, tobacco merchant, Richmond, Virginia, 1847-1848. Purchased Mercy in May 1847. Business records show he began experiencing inexplicable financial losses within weeks, shipments that disappeared, contracts that fell through, partnerships that dissolved. His diary from December 1847 contains one entry. "She told me 3 months ago that my business would collapse by Christmas. I laughed. Today I filed for bankruptcy. She knew. God in heaven, she knew." Morrison sold Mercy to a traveling slave trader for a fraction of her cost. The Reverend Charles Ashford, Methodist minister, North Carolina, 1848, purchased Mercy to serve his household and provide an example of Christian education. Church records indicate he began a series of sermons about the dangers of pride and the sin of questioning God's order. His private correspondence reveals why. The girl has read the entire Bible once, hearing me practice my sermons, and can now quote chapter and verse with perfect accuracy. More disturbing, she has begun asking questions about contradictions in Scripture that I cannot answer. My congregation has noticed my uncertainty. I have lost their confidence. He sold her within 4 months. Dr. James Holloway, Charleston physician, 1848-1849, purchased Mercy specifically to study her abilities. His medical journal documents daily tests of memory, reasoning, and prediction. The journal entries grow increasingly frantic. She is not guessing. She is not performing tricks. Yesterday, I thought of a complex surgical case I encountered 15 years ago. I had not spoken of it, had not written of it, and she described the patient's symptoms and the outcome before I could ask. She said, "You think very loudly, doctor. I am a man of science. I do not believe in telepathy." And yet, Dr. Holloway died in his sleep in November 1849, cause of death undetermined. He was 34 years old. The Langford family, plantation owners, Georgia, 1850, purchased Mercy to serve as a nursemaid. Within 2 months, their 8-year-old daughter was speaking Latin phrases she had never been taught and solving arithmetic problems beyond her grade. The family's personal letters reveal panic. "Our daughter says Mercy teaches her just by being near. We did not give permission for teaching. We have forbidden it." But somehow knowledge transfers. They sold Mercy immediately and sent their daughter to a boarding school in Boston, far from the South. Each owner encountered the same pattern. Mercy's presence revealed knowledge, exposed secrets, or predicted outcomes that should have been impossible to know. And each time, the owner's response was fear, followed by desperate removal. But there was one owner who responded differently. In March 1851, Mercy was sold to a widow named Catherine Devereux. Catherine Devereux was an anomaly in Charleston society. Widowed at 29 when her husband died of yellow fever, she inherited a modest estate and a small household of enslaved workers. Unlike most plantation widows who remarried quickly or returned to their families, Catherine chose to manage her property independently. She educated herself in law, agriculture, and accounting. She was tolerated by Charleston society, but never fully accepted. A woman operating in a man's sphere was always suspect. Her diary, preserved by her descendants and donated to the South Carolina Historical Society in 1975, provides the most detailed record of Mercy's abilities. The first entry about Mercy dated March 19, 1851. "I purchased a girl today, age 16, whom the trader assured me was quiet and obedient. His insistence on these qualities, repeated 3 times, made me suspicious. People do not emphasize ordinary virtue so forcefully unless hiding extraordinary faults. I asked why she had been sold so many times. He said she made owners uncomfortable. I asked how. He would not say. I bought her anyway. Perhaps I am as contrary as they say." Within 2 weeks, Catherine understood what the trader had meant. March 30th, Mercy organized my entire household account books without being asked. She found errors in my ledger that I had missed for months. When I asked how she learned bookkeeping, she said she watched me work once, 2 years ago, in another house. She remembered the system completely. I should be grateful. Instead, I am unnerved. April 12th, she predicted the spring frost that killed the Mitchells' tobacco crop, said she could feel the cold coming in the air's pattern. I thought it was superstition. The frost came exactly when she said. The Mitchells lost everything. April 28th, I have begun testing her, as I suspect previous owners did. Today I gave her a complex legal document in French, which I struggled to read despite 2 years of study. She read it aloud, translated it to English, and explained the legal implications, all within an hour. When I asked where she learned French, she said, "I heard Mrs. Whitmore's tutor teaching her son 6 years ago. I listened through the wall." But Catherine's entries reveal something previous owners had not documented: curiosity instead of fear. May 10th. I asked Mercy today how her mind works. She was silent for a long time, then said, "Imagine that you could see every book that was ever read aloud in every room you've ever been in, all at once, still open in your mind. That's what it's like." I asked if this was a blessing. She said, "No, Mom, it's a punishment, because I remember every word ever said to me, including every time someone said I wasn't human." Catherine Devereux made a decision that would alter both their lives. Instead of fearing Mercy, she decided to protect her. May 15th. I have dismissed my overseer and will manage the household myself. Too many questions were being asked about Mercy. Neighbors have begun visiting with unusual frequency, asking to see the unusual girl. I have refused all requests. If they want to stare at someone as if she were a curiosity, they can go to a circus. For 2 years, Catherine and Mercy existed in an uneasy equilibrium. Catherine gave Mercy access to her private library, illegally under South Carolina law, and in exchange, Mercy helped manage the estate's accounts, predict crop outcomes, and solve problems that would have required expensive consultants. The arrangement should have remained private. But in the summer of 1853, a single event made privacy impossible. A prominent Charleston banker named Thaddeus Calhoun visited Catherine to discuss a business loan. Mercy served tea during the meeting. As Calhoun prepared to leave, Mercy spoke, something she rarely did in front of visitors. "Mr. Calhoun, you should not travel to Columbia next week as planned. The railroad bridge over the Congaree River will fail." Catherine's diary describes the moment. The room went utterly silent. Calhoun stared at Mercy as if she had sprouted wings. I asked her to leave, but the damage was done. Calhoun demanded to know what she meant. I claimed she had overheard workers discussing bridge maintenance. He did not believe me. Thaddeus Calhoun traveled to Columbia the following week, as scheduled. On August 12, 1853, the railroad bridge over the Congaree River collapsed, killing 12 passengers. Calhoun had cancelled his trip at the last moment. Later accounts say he had a strange premonition, but someone told the truth. Within days, Charleston society learned that an enslaved woman had predicted the disaster. The response was immediate and severe. On August 20, 1853, Catherine Devereux received a formal letter from the Charleston City Council. The letter, preserved in city archives, demanded that she appear before the council to address concerns regarding the management and conduct of enslaved persons on your property. The hearing took place on August 27, 1853. No official transcript exists. Such hearings were not typically recorded, but Catherine's diary entry from that night provides detail. They did not want to understand. They wanted to condemn. For 2 hours, they questioned me about Mercy, how I managed her, what privileges I had given her, whether I had allowed her to read. Councilman Bradford accused me of operating a school for Negroes in violation of state law. Councilman Porter suggested I was practicing witchcraft. When I attempted to explain that Mercy's abilities were exceptional but natural, they became angry. Mr. Calhoun himself stood and said, "Mrs. Devereux, you do not understand what you possess. This girl is dangerous, not because of what she is, but because of what she represents. If word spreads that a Negro can predict disasters, solve complex problems, and demonstrate intelligence beyond education, it will undermine the very foundation of our society." The council issued an order. Catherine must sell Mercy within 30 days, or the city would confiscate her under public safety provisions. Catherine refused. August 30th. I have decided I will not sell Mercy to anyone. If they force the sale, I will petition the courts. Mr. Devereux left me a modest fortune, and I will spend every cent defending this position. Not because I am noble, but because I am stubborn, and I despise being told what to do with my own property by men who would mismanage a household budget without a woman's supervision. She hired an attorney, Jonathan Graves, a Harvard-educated lawyer who had recently moved to Charleston. His legal correspondence, held in the South Carolina Law Archive, shows a man initially confident, then increasingly disturbed. September 3, 1853. Mrs. Devereux has retained me to fight the City Council's confiscation order. The case should be straightforward. Property rights trump public safety claims unless imminent danger can be demonstrated. I'm confident of victory. September 15, 1853. I have now met the subject of this case, Mrs. Devereux's enslaved woman, Mercy. I examined her for 2 hours, as I would a witness. I asked her questions of law, history, and Latin. She answered every question correctly. More troubling, she anticipated my questions before I asked them. At one point she said, "You're going to ask about the precedent in Campbell v. Georgia, 1848. The answer is that the court ruled property rights absolute except in cases of public rebellion or insurrection. But the court's definition of insurrection was deliberately vague. I had not mentioned that case. It was the next question in my notes. September 22, 1853. I do not believe I can win this case. Not because the law is against us, the law is clear, but because the judges will rule against us anyway. They must, because if they rule in our favor, they validate that an enslaved person can possess intelligence that surpasses their own. And that validation would destroy the entire legal framework justifying slavery. Mercy herself told me this 2 days ago. She said, "You will argue brilliantly, Mr. Graves, and you will lose, because they are not judging law, they are judging their own fear." The case went to Charleston Circuit Court on October 10, 1853. The trial lasted 3 days. Graves argued property rights, precedent, and the absence of any criminal conduct. The prosecution argued public safety, social order, and the danger of permitting persons of inferior race to demonstrate unnatural abilities that disturb community peace. On October 13, 1853, Judge Harrison Middleton ruled in favor of the City Council. The decision, still available in Charleston court records, includes this passage. While we acknowledge Mrs. Devereux's legal right to property, we find that the subject in question presents an exceptional circumstance. The enslaved woman called Mercy has demonstrated abilities that, whether natural or otherwise, create disruption and fear within the community. More importantly, her continued presence in Charleston exhibiting such abilities poses a danger to social order and racial hierarchy. We therefore uphold the Council's order of confiscation, with the provision that the subject be sold at public auction to an owner outside South Carolina. Catherine Devereux wrote that night, "They ruled not on law, but on terror. Terror that a black woman might be smarter than they are, and they called it justice." The public auction was scheduled for November 1, 1853, but 3 days before the auction, Mercy disappeared. The escape attempt is documented in multiple sources, each telling a different version. Charleston newspapers reported that Mercy absconded from lawful custody and that a manhunt was underway. Catherine Devereux's diary tells a different story. October 29th. Mercy is gone. I will not write where or how, in case this diary is seized. I will only say that I helped her, and I do not regret it. If they hang me for it, I will die without shame. An editorial in the Charleston Mercury, dated November 2, 1853, reveals the panic. The escaped Negro woman, known as Mercy, remains at large. Readers should understand this is not an ordinary fugitive case. This individual has demonstrated abilities that pose unique dangers. She can manipulate the unwary with her intelligence, predict events that allow her to evade capture and persuade others to violate law and decency. Any person harboring or assisting this fugitive will face the harshest legal penalties. For 2 weeks, Mercy evaded capture. Reports placed her in different locations. Some claimed she was seen heading north toward the mountains. Others said she had boarded a ship to the Caribbean. All reports agreed on one thing: she seemed to know where search parties would be before they arrived. But on November 15, 1853, she was caught. The capture report, filed by a slave patrol in rural South Carolina, provides the details. Fugitive Negro woman apprehended at dawn, 12 miles north of Spartanburg. Subject was found sleeping in an abandoned barn. Offered no resistance. When asked why she stopped running, subject stated, "I knew you would find me today. I saw it 3 days ago. There's no point in running from what's already happened." Subject appears mentally disturbed. Recommend examination before return to Charleston. Mercy was returned to Charleston on November 18, 1853. She was imprisoned in the city workhouse, a facility used to confine enslaved people awaiting punishment or sale. The workhouse manager's log notes that she was kept in solitary confinement due to her history of disturbing others with predictions and unnatural knowledge. Catherine Devereux attempted to visit. She was denied. On November 20th, a physician named Dr. Samuel Pritchard examined Mercy at the request of the city authorities. His report, marked confidential and discovered in a private collection in 1982, is the most detailed medical assessment of Mercy's abilities. Subject: female Negro, age approximately 18 years, named Mercy. Examination conducted November 20th, 1853. Physical condition: subject shows signs of malnourishment and exhaustion, but no serious injury. Mental state: fully lucid, articulate, and cooperative. Testing procedure: I conducted a series of examinations over 3 hours to determine if the subject's reputed abilities were genuine or deceptive. Test 1, memory. I read a passage from a medical text on human anatomy, 15 minutes of complex material. Subject repeated the entire passage verbatim after a single hearing. She then explained the medical concepts in simpler language, demonstrating comprehension, not mere repetition. Test 2, mathematics. I provided a series of complex calculations that would take me 30 minutes with paper and pencil. Subject solved them mentally in under 5 minutes. All answers correct. Test 3, prediction. I asked subject if she could predict future events. Subject responded, "I don't predict the future, doctor. I see patterns. You're going to ask me next about my childhood. Then you're going to ask if I've ever been possessed by spirits. Then you're going to write in your report that I'm either a fraud or a danger. You'll choose danger because fraud would make you look foolish." This was precisely my planned sequence of questions. Conclusion: I cannot explain this subject's abilities through any known medical science. She is not deceptive. Her skills are genuine. She is not mentally ill. Her reasoning is sound. The only rational conclusion is that she possesses a cognitive capacity far beyond normal human range. I do not believe this is supernatural. I believe this is natural but exceedingly rare. Recommendation: this subject should be studied by the finest medical minds in the nation. She represents an opportunity to understand human intelligence in ways we have never imagined. Personal note: I asked her what she wanted. She said, "I want to be free, doctor. I want to read books and solve problems and use my mind the way God gave it to me. But they'll never let me, will they?" I told her I didn't know. She said, "Yes, you do. You've already decided I'm too dangerous to live freely. You decided that before you walked in this room." She was right. Dr. Pritchard's recommendation was ignored. On November 25th, 1853, the Charleston City Council made a different decision. They voted unanimously to have Mercy sold at auction to the most secure buyer, code for the harshest, most isolated plantation they could find. The goal was simple: make her disappear. The auction took place on December 3, 1853, in the Charleston slave market. It was not a public auction, only pre-approved buyers were permitted to attend. The goal was containment, not profit. 7 buyers attended. Among them was a man named Elias Garrett, who owned a rice plantation on an isolated island off the South Carolina coast. Garrett was known for operating one of the most brutal, isolated plantations in the state, a place where enslaved people were worked until exhaustion and where escape was nearly impossible due to the surrounding marshland. Garrett purchased Mercy for $200, a high price, suggesting he understood her value not as a laborer, but as a prize. Catherine Devereaux attended the auction, though she was not permitted to bid. Her diary entry from that day is brief. They sold her to a man who will try to break her. I pray he fails. Mercy arrived at Garrett's plantation on December 8, 1853. The plantation records, preserved in part due to a legal dispute decades later, document what happened next. For the first week, Mercy worked in the rice fields, brutal labor that killed workers through exhaustion, disease, and heat. Garrett's overseer noted in his log, "New woman, purchased from Charleston, silent. Works adequately, no trouble." But on December 15th, something changed. A rice field worker became gravely ill, fever, convulsions, signs of poisoning. The plantation had no doctor. The overseer prepared to let the man die, as was common practice, but Mercy intervened. An account by another enslaved worker on the plantation, recorded decades later in a WPA slave narrative interview, describes the moment. This woman, Mercy, she come over to where James was dying. She looked at him, touched his head and said, "He ate nightshade berries this morning. He thought they was safe. You need to make him throw up everything, then give him milk and charcoal water." The overseer, he laughed at her, said she didn't know nothing. But she kept saying it calm and sure. Finally, another worker did what she said, and James lived. That's when Mr. Garrett took notice. Elias Garrett summoned Mercy to the main house. According to plantation correspondence, he spent 2 hours questioning her about how she knew medical treatment for poisoning. Her answer, "I heard a doctor talk about it once. I remember everything." Garrett, unlike previous owners, saw an opportunity. If Mercy could diagnose illness and prescribe treatment, she could keep his workforce alive and productive. He moved her from field labor to the plantation sick house. For 6 months, Mercy served as a de facto plantation physician. She diagnosed illnesses, recommended treatments, and saved lives that would have otherwise been lost. Garrett's financial records show increased productivity. Fewer deaths meant more labor. But Mercy's presence at the plantation created something Garrett had not anticipated: hope. The same WPA narrative interview describes what began to happen. Mercy, she didn't just heal bodies. She started talking to us, teaching us things. She'd tell us about places in the world we'd never seen. She'd explain how our bodies worked, so we understood what was happening when we got sick. She taught some of the children their numbers and letters, not writing it down, that would have got us killed, but just speaking it so they'd know. And the most important thing, she told us we were smart. She'd say, "You're not dumb. They need you to believe you are, because if you knew how smart you are, this whole system falls apart." That was dangerous talk, but it was true talk. By the summer of 1854, Elias Garrett's plantation was changing. Enslaved workers were beginning to ask questions, to organize themselves, to demand better treatment. Nothing dramatic, no rebellion, but a subtle shift in power dynamics. Workers who had been brutalized into submission were beginning to remember their humanity. Garrett recognized the threat. On July 10, 1854, he wrote to a colleague, "The woman I purchased has proven both valuable and dangerous. She keeps my workers healthy, which profits me greatly, but she also teaches them things I did not authorize. Yesterday, one of my field hands questioned an overseer's order, citing inefficiency in the work pattern. When asked where he learned such language, he admitted Mercy had explained better farming techniques. I cannot have this, but I cannot afford to lose her medical knowledge either. Garrett made a decision. Isolate Mercy completely. He moved her to a small cabin at the edge of the plantation, away from other enslaved workers. She was permitted to treat the sick only when summoned, and always under supervision. No other contact was allowed. The isolation lasted 3 months. On October 22, 1854, a hurricane struck the South Carolina coast. The storm destroyed crops, flooded buildings, and killed dozens across the region. Garrett's plantation suffered massive damage. The main house partially collapsed. The rice fields were ruined. The death toll among enslaved workers was 17, but Mercy had warned them. 3 days before the hurricane, Mercy told the overseer that a major storm was coming and that people needed to evacuate to higher ground. The overseer ignored her. Mercy then told several enslaved workers directly. Some listened. Those who listened survived. After the storm, Garrett found Mercy sitting on the porch of her cabin, which had somehow remained standing while buildings around it collapsed. According to a letter Garrett wrote to his attorney, Mercy said only, "I told you it was coming. You didn't listen. And now 17 people are dead who didn't have to die." Garrett sold Mercy 1 week later. Between November 1854 and August 1856, Mercy was sold 4 more times. Each sale followed the same pattern. An owner would attempt to use her knowledge, she would demonstrate abilities that terrified them, and they would sell her immediately. But documentation from this period is scarce. Most owners didn't write about her. They wanted no record of her existence. What remains are fragments, a bill of sale from a Virginia plantation owner who noted in the margin, "Possesses unusual knowledge. Recommends sale only to owners prepared for difficulties." A letter from a Tennessee merchant who wrote, "The woman I purchased in March has proven entirely unsettling. She knows things about my business, debts I have not disclosed, partnerships that are failing, and she speaks of them casually, as if reading from a ledger I have never shown her. My wife insists she is cursed. I think she is simply too intelligent to be enslaved." Which is perhaps more frightening. A medical report from a Kentucky physician who examined Mercy after she correctly diagnosed a patient he had misdiagnosed. This woman has no medical training, yet her understanding of disease exceeds my own. I asked her how. She said, "I think differently than you do. I see connections that you miss." I asked if she could teach others to think this way. She said, "I've tried. But you can't teach someone to be born different." By August 1856, Mercy was 21 years old. She had been enslaved for her entire life, sold at least 15 times, and had survived attempts to break her, silence her, and erase her. And then she arrived in New Orleans. Louisiana in 1856 was different from South Carolina. New Orleans was a cosmopolitan city with a complex racial hierarchy that included free people of color, mixed-race individuals with legal rights, and a thriving black intellectual community that existed in defiance of segregation laws. It was still a slave city, brutal and oppressive, but with cracks in the system that didn't exist in rural plantations. Mercy was sold at a New Orleans auction to a Creole businessman named Philippe Marchand. Marchand owned rental properties, operated a shipping business, and employed both enslaved and free black workers. His business records show he purchased Mercy for $900, a significant investment, after hearing from a colleague that she had exceptional mathematical ability useful for bookkeeping. Marchand's personal correspondence reveals that he was a pragmatic, calculating man who cared little for social conventions and greatly for profit. When he first met Mercy, he later wrote, "He decided to test her immediately. I gave her a complex shipping ledger, records of cargo, dates, tariffs, and expenses spanning 3 months, and asked her to identify any discrepancies. She examined the ledger for 20 minutes, then told me I had been overcharged on 6 shipments, that 3 of my partners were stealing from me, and that if I continued my current spending rate, I would be insolvent within 2 years. She was correct on every point. I then asked her how she learned accounting. She said, I watched bookkeepers work. I remember how they think. I asked if she could manage my entire business accounts. She said yes. I asked if she would try to escape if I gave her that responsibility. She said, probably, but you'll get at least a year of perfect bookkeeping before I do. Marchand remarkably laughed. He made a decision that most Southern slaveholders would have considered insane. He gave Mercy substantial autonomy. She managed his accounts, identified business opportunities, and advised him on financial decisions. In exchange, he allowed her a degree of freedom unusual for enslaved people: private living quarters, access to newspapers and books, and permission to move through the city when conducting business. It was not freedom. It was exploitation packaged with superficial privileges, but it was different from what Mercy had experienced before. For 8 months, Mercy operated in a strange liminal space. She was legally enslaved, but functionally operated as a business manager. She walked through New Orleans streets, interacted with free black intellectuals, and began to imagine something she had never been able to before: a future beyond enslavement. Marchand's business prospered. His letters from this period reveal grudging respect. May 1856, Mercy predicted that cotton prices would drop in June. I hedged my investments accordingly. The prices dropped exactly as she said. I asked how she knew. She said, I read the patterns in shipping reports and weather predictions. The drought in Mississippi means lower yields, which means speculation will drive prices up temporarily, then crash. It's not magic. It's logic. I make more money with her mind working for me than I ever did alone. But New Orleans's free black community noticed Mercy. Word spread that an enslaved woman with extraordinary intelligence was operating with unusual freedom. Some saw her as a symbol of resistance. Others saw her as evidence that enslaved people were as capable as any free person. And some saw her as a threat, because if she could be brilliant while enslaved, what did that say about free black people who had not achieved as much? In June 1856, Mercy attended a gathering of free people of color, an illegal act for an enslaved person. But Marchand allowed it because the gathering included potential business contacts. At that gathering, she met a man named Daniel Auguste, a free black teacher who ran a secret school for black children. Auguste's diary, preserved by his descendants, describes their conversation. June 14, 1856. I met today a woman who exists in impossible circumstances. She is enslaved, yet she speaks like a scholar. She has never been formally educated, yet her understanding surpasses most educated men I know. I asked her how she learned. She said, I listen, I remember, I think. I asked her what she wanted. She said, I want what you have, the right to use my mind without asking permission. I told her I would help her gain freedom. She smiled sadly and said, you can't help me. My freedom isn't something you can purchase or negotiate. It's something I'll have to take, and when I do, they'll hunt me until I'm dead or gone. But I'll try anyway. On August 15, 1856, Mercy disappeared from New Orleans. Again. Marchand's reaction was immediate and furious. He filed a fugitive slave claim and hired slave catchers. Advertisements appeared in newspapers across Louisiana and beyond. Runaway, Negro woman, age about 21, calling herself Mercy. Light brown complexion, medium height, speaks with uncommon intelligence. Warning, this fugitive is extremely clever and may attempt to pass as a free person or deceive those who encounter her. $500 reward for return. But Mercy was not found. Days passed, then weeks. Search parties combed Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Informants reported possible sightings. Some said she had gone north toward Memphis. Others claimed she was hiding in the bayous. A few insisted she had boarded a ship to Haiti. All reports agreed on one thing. She seemed to anticipate every move the slave catchers made. They would arrive at a location only to learn she had left hours earlier. They would set traps, and she would avoid them. It was as if she could see the future, or more accurately, as if she understood the patterns of pursuit so completely that she was always one step ahead. 3 weeks after her escape, a letter arrived at Marchand's office. It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched documents Mercy had written while managing his accounts. "Mr. Marchand, by the time you read this, I will be far from Louisiana. You may wonder how I knew when to leave, how I knew which roads would be watched and which would be clear. The answer is simple. I listened to your conversations, memorized your contacts, and understood your methods. You are a predictable man, which made you easy to escape from. You were not cruel to me as other owners were. You gave me work that used my mind instead of breaking my body. But you still believed you owned me. You believed my intelligence was yours to exploit. You never asked if I wanted to manage your accounts or solve your problems. You assumed my existence was for your benefit. I am writing to tell you that I will not be caught. Not because I am lucky, but because I am smarter than anyone you will hire to find me. And I'm writing to tell you something else. I am not the only one. There are others like me, enslaved people with minds you cannot imagine, talents you cannot measure, dreams you cannot contain. You have built an entire society on the belief that we are inferior. But every day, someone like me proves that belief is a lie. You will not find me, but you will remember me. And you will wonder for the rest of your life how many others like me are hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment to be free. Mercy. Marchand never published this letter. He kept it in his private files, and it was only discovered after his death in 1889. In the margin he had written, "She was right. I never found her, and I never stopped wondering." This is where the documentary record becomes fractured. After August 1856, Mercy's name appears in no official records, no slave registries, no fugitive reports, no arrest warrants. For historians, this typically means one of three things. She died, she was caught and executed without record, or she successfully escaped and lived under a new identity. But scattered evidence suggests a different story. In September 1856, a newspaper in Ohio published a brief report about a colored woman of exceptional intelligence who had appeared at an abolitionist meeting and spoke about the conditions of slavery with unprecedented eloquence and factual precision. The woman gave no name. She disappeared after the meeting. In November 1856, a Quaker abolitionist named Rachel Thompson wrote in her diary about helping a fugitive woman travel north. The entry reads, "She knew things about the Underground Railroad that I had not told her, safe houses, routes, contacts. When I asked how she knew, she said, 'I can see patterns in how people think. Abolitionists think in predictable ways.' She was with us for 3 days, then continued north. I do not know where she went, but I believe she will survive. She is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met." In January 1857, a letter from a free black community in Canada mentions a woman arrived from the South who teaches children with remarkable skill and can solve problems that perplex educated men. The letter provides no name, but the description matches. These fragments are not proof. They are hints, suggestions, the possibility of a life continued. The question that haunts historians is not just what happened to Mercy, but what her existence meant. Because if the records are accurate, if a woman with her abilities truly existed, then what does that say about every person enslaved in America? The antebellum South built its entire social, economic, and moral framework on one premise, that black people were intellectually inferior to white people. Laws, religious doctrine, scientific theories, and social customs all reinforced this belief. It wasn't just prejudice, it was the foundation of a civilization. Mercy's existence, if real, shattered that foundation, not because she was unique, but because she proved that extraordinary intelligence could exist in someone enslaved. And if she could possess such intelligence, Then what about the thousands of other enslaved people whose abilities were never documented, never tested, never allowed to flourish? The historical record shows that Southern authorities understood this threat. Every time Mercy's abilities became public, the response was not curiosity but fear, not study but suppression. Because allowing her to exist, to be known, to be acknowledged, would force white society to confront an unbearable truth, that the system they built was not just unjust, but impossible. That you cannot enslave a people and claim they are inferior when one of them can outthink, outpredict, and outmaneuver you at every turn. And so they tried to erase her. They sold her away, isolated her, hunted her. They removed her name from records. They called her abilities unnatural, rather than admit they were proof of natural human genius. But they did not succeed, because even now, more than 160 years later, fragments of her story remain. Court documents that describe her intelligence, medical reports that cannot explain her abilities, letters from people who encountered her and were forever changed by the experience. And in those fragments is a message. Mercy existed. And if she existed, then the system that tried to erase her was built on a lie. In 1923, a historian researching antebellum Charleston discovered a sealed box of papers in the basement of the old Charleston courthouse. The box contained documents scheduled for destruction, old case files, personal correspondence, and medical records deemed too sensitive or controversial to preserve. Among those papers was Dr. Samuel Pritchard's full medical report on Mercy, including a section he had not included in his official submission. I asked Mercy, during our examination, what she believed would happen to her. She said, "They will try to destroy me, doctor. Not because of what I've done, but because of what I represent. I represent the possibility that everything they believe about race and intelligence is wrong. And that possibility is more dangerous to them than any rebellion or resistance. So they will call me a liar or possessed or insane. They will say I'm an exception, a trick, an impossibility. But I'm not. I'm just a person who remembers everything and thinks clearly. If I'd been born white and free, you'd call me a genius and give me a university position. But I was born black and enslaved, so you call me a problem." I told her that perhaps someday the world would be different. She said, "Perhaps, but I won't live to see it. I've accepted that. But maybe someone will find these records someday and understand what they destroyed. Maybe that will matter." That same archive box contained one other document, a letter written in 1889 by an elderly woman in Canada. The letter was addressed to the Charleston Historical Society, but was never delivered. "My name is Catherine Devereux. I am 89 years old. I am writing to you because I want there to be a record of something that happened in your city more than 30 years ago. I owned an enslaved woman named Mercy. She was the most intelligent person I ever met. Your city tried to destroy her because her existence threatened your beliefs about race. I helped her escape twice. I do not know if she survived, but I know this. She was real. Her abilities were real. And every day I live with the knowledge that your civilization destroyed or attempted to destroy someone who could have benefited all of humanity simply because of the color of her skin. I'm sending you this letter because I want you to remember her. I want you to know that when you speak of the glory of the antebellum South, you are speaking of a society that feared intelligence in enslaved people more than it valued truth. You built monuments to men who owned human beings. Perhaps someday you will build monuments to the people they tried to erase. I do not expect you to publish this letter. I expect you to destroy it, as you destroyed so many others. But I had to write it anyway, because Mercy existed, and that matters. The letter was never delivered. It sat in an archive box for 34 years before being discovered. By then, Catherine Devereux had been dead for decades, and Mercy's fate remained unknown. But here is what we do know. In 1865, the Civil War ended. Slavery was abolished. Millions of formerly enslaved people began lives as free individuals. Among them were people of extraordinary talent, intelligence, and ability, people who had been forced to hide their minds, suppress their knowledge, and pretend to be less than they were in order to survive. Some of those people became teachers, doctors, business owners, inventors, writers. They built schools, established communities, and created institutions that still exist today. They did this while facing continued oppression, violence, and discrimination. They did it anyway. We do not know if Mercy was among them, but we know people like her were. We know that the South's greatest fear, that enslaved people were as intelligent, capable, and human as their enslavers, was not just true, but obvious once freedom allowed talent to flourish. And we know that for every documented story like Mercy's, there are thousands that were never written down. Thousands of people whose brilliance was suppressed, whose abilities were denied, whose lives were destroyed by a system terrified of their potential. This is the real horror of slavery, not just the physical brutality, but the intellectual annihilation, the deliberate erasure of genius, the systematic destruction of human potential on an industrial scale. Mercy's story, whether she survived, where she went, what she became, remains a mystery. But the meaning of her story is clear. She was never the exception. She was the proof, and the society that tried to silence her knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were destroying evidence of their own crime. They knew they were erasing someone brilliant, and they did it anyway, because preserving their power mattered more than truth, more than justice, more than the life of one extraordinary woman. That is the story that should never be forgotten. If this story affected you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. History like this needs to be remembered, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true.